Hey, well, very good morning to all of you people out there in Chicago listening land. This is Michael James. I'm here with Tom Clark, and we're going to have a really nice show this morning. We are broadcasting live from 26 East Pearson, the Loyola University WLUW Studios, and we're going to have Don Rose talking about the election. We're going to have Timuel Black, the great historian and activist, talking about elections past and this election too. And we're going to have various kinds of beautiful music for you today. I think, Tom, what was that music we just listened to?
We just listened to Winona Carr doing
a song about baseball.
Ball game is life. You know,
the ball game of life.
And you pick yourself back up.
Well,
and that's been, a lot of the last 108 years, I guess we could say, is a lot of falling down and picking yourself back up, and we finally did it. I'm talking to a Southside fan here, Michael James. He's been very generous and patient with us Northsiders and our celebration of the Cubs.
I got to say, Tom, I loved it. I've been watching the team for a while, and I love these young guys. I think I got a funny feeling my dad, who grew up on the South Side, may have been a Cub fan because I have photographs from the 30s of Gabby Hartnett that he took, one little tiny picture. So it may be something that previous members of the James family were into, would be the Cubs. But Bill Veeck was my guy. And I'm glad we have two world champion baseball teams in the same city.
I was born blue and raised blue. My neighborhood, the worst thing that could happen, if the only thing that was worse than the Cubs losing was the Sox winning.
Do you still feel that way?
I still don't feel that way, but that's the way I was raised.
I'm for both teams.
And
how about you, Tim? How do you tie into this?
Well, I was a Sox fan because I grew up on the South Side with the American Giants, the black baseball player playing right down the street. And I was a Brooklyn fan when Jackie Robinson started.
Yeah, me too.
Everybody was.
I went my first Brooklyn game in '48.
But then when the Cubs began to bring black players on the team, I was Sox and Cubs. I'm so happy.
If we got time, the best quick story about that. The Cubs were the last National League team to hire a black player, and they brought up a young second baseman named Gene Baker, and nobody on the team would room with him. And they said
there was no Pee Wee Reese to
there was
break the ice.
Pee Wee Reese. Who was Jackie Robinson's mentor at the Dodgers, and they said, well, we got this kid shortstop down in such and such a league, the AAA. What's his name? Banks. Maybe we can bring him up so he can room with Baker, because Baker was going to be the star. And so they brought him up late, but as it happened in those late games, the late season games. By the batting order, Ernie was the first to bat for the Cubs, so that's why he's always been called the first Cubs player. But what I think about is, if the Cubs had had a Pee Wee Reese or more liberals, they might never have brought Banks up. They could have traded him away, and we may never have an Ernie Banks.
You heard it here on Live from the Heartland, and that was Don Rose, one of our guests this morning. And we also have Timuel Black, and we have our co-host here, Tom. What do you got to say, Tom?
Well, I appreciate the Southsiders supporting us Northsiders, but I also want to say, I think part of the charm of this year's team, besides it being just a really fascinating mix of old and young and practically every background you could think of in the American hemispheres, North and South, I really consider myself a Chicago baseball fan.
I like that.
While my first game was Wrigley, that my dad brought me to, we mostly went to Sox games. I grew up with Minnie Minoso, Nellie Fox, and Hoyt Wilhelm, and people like that, because there were night games at Comiskey, and that's when my dad could take us. But to the end, he was a diehard Cub fan, and I think that was part of the emotion of this, is that we were all thinking of our relatives past, who weren't here for this moment. And I know within my extended family, that was a really big part of our texting and emailing and sending pictures around, where how many pictures of Dad, who passed 10 years ago, were on a coffee table or on top of the TV. And I have family members who are convinced that my dad and others are the ones that brought this championship.
Oh, they're all up in heaven rejoicing. I'm glad that Don filled in the little bit of negative information that the Cubs were the last National League team to take an African-American player. So they're in the same league with the Boston Red Sox, who were the last American League team. Okay, let's get on to some politics and some things going on. We have our little bit of banter here. Our co-host Katie Hogan, I think, is on her way in a bus with a whole bunch of people to Iowa. They've been doing great work to bringing in the vote for, I hope, our next president, which will be a woman. You know, speaking of Iowa, I want to bring up this thing about the 2 officers that were shot in Des Moines. I don't know if you people saw it because it disappeared very quickly from the news. You would have thought it'd be all over. I woke up in the morning and I saw a thing, 2 officers shot in Des Moines. And they were actually, someone had apparently gone up to the car and just blown them away separately, 2 separate incidents. Turns out it's a white guy who's a Trump supporter who had just put on Facebook pictures of him flashing a Confederate flag in front of some African Americans at a football game.
But they never played it very big, and most people were left to believe, I believe,
that it was blacks.
That was a black guy that did it. And they showed his picture, but he was never identified as an alt-righter.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And at the same time, there was also a woman got busted for voting twice, or trying to vote twice in Iowa, and guess who she was voting for? Trump.
Yeah.
Okay, enough of that. You got any more banter?
Well, I'm going to go right into this politics stuff, Michael. Will we have a woman as the next president, Don Rose?
Well, the odds say we will. And depending on the odds maker you look at, from Nate Silver, who is the most pessimistic among the positive.
And was our beacon in the last election with Obama.
That, yeah, he says that we've got about a 2/3 chance. The people at Princeton, who have always been very good and based theirs not on national and local polls, but only on local polls, put the odds of her election way up in the 90s. So it's a virtually sure thing. The problem is, ever since that, what I believe illegal Comey announcement about the investigation, she has been bleeding. And it's hard to say whether the bleeding has stopped. If the bleeding continues, it could change the face of the thing. But right now, she should, by my estimation, win with somewhere between 280 and 300,000, 280 and 300 electoral votes. But it is a dicey situation when you see a trend going against you, and it's hard to say whether that trend has stopped. A couple of polls yesterday suggested the trends may have stopped.
Tim Black, you were talking on our trip up from the South Side about the support in the black community, and in particular, major celebrities that Hillary did not seem to go after to get their endorsement or support.
And I'm very sorry about that. I think Oprah and some prominent black athlete would have made a lot of difference across racial lines, as well as stimulating the black vote. Now, I'm concerned about turnout.
Oprah came in late.
But she should have used Oprah.
Right.
Regardless, Oprah is a major tool who could have been used effectively and would have been, as well as the great basketball players that made a contribution.
LeBron James, yeah, that was wonderful. And LeBron, who is such a guy,
so it would have made a difference in stimulation. Now, what I'm concerned about, and have been concerned about from the very beginning, because there's not optimism among blacks, particularly young, relatively poorly educated blacks, that it doesn't make a difference. And that was also indicated in the governor's race and the mayoral, that the turnout among young blacks. And they don't believe it makes a difference who is the mayor, who is the governor, who will be the president. And so the stimulation that was generated with Barack among that group could make a great deal of difference. And what this frighteningly for me will be too close a race, because the women who should have, I think, be supporting Hillary don't seem to be numerically doing that. The groups are too close together in terms of women's votes.
It should never have been a close race at all.
Let me just say one thing about getting out the vote among young black and young whites too. Chance the Rapper of some renown here in Chicago, along with the band Twin Peaks and other bands, will be playing a Monday night concert on the top of some hotel that's about getting out the vote. Chance didn't do much for the White Sox as their spokesman, but he is quite a guy and he's on the right track.
But I really want the turnout to be massive.
Oh, we hope so.
So that it will indicate to whoever, well, that'll be massive, particularly if so Oprah will understand, I mean, that Hillary will understand that it doesn't be for the turnout. Among women, among young people particularly, she would not be the president of the United States.
Well, the upside of that, or the compensating side of that, is the fact that Latinos have been registering in monstrous numbers. Now, they've never turned out anywhere near where the black community has. If Latinos had ever turned out to the same number that blacks have, we would never elect a Republican ever again in this century. But the Latinos, I think, are going to make the difference, not just in the Southwest, but in a number of states, Florida,
possibly Georgia,
possibly Georgia, where the blacks do seem to be coming out. North Carolina has a Latino population. We don't think of it as a Latino state or even as many Latinos as Chicago, but they are an increasing factor. And the early returns from Florida, the actual vote returns indicate that Hillary should win Florida despite the polls that show her even. There was a study done that showed that many Republicans were crossing over. You know, they could tell that the Republicans and the Democrats, where they register there, unlike here, were coming out in almost equal numbers. But the fact that many Republicans were crossing over to vote for Hillary makes the difference. If they get Florida, it becomes virtually impossible for Trump to win. But there's some danger spots. You know, some of the upper Midwest. It looks like it's softening, but I don't think enough to break it open by Tuesday.
Tim, I don't want to
What
put you...
frightens me so much about this, maybe that's because I'm so old and your young people may not have had that experience, but if you talk with your older relatives, I think they would give similar, is the similarities between what I see in Donald Trump and the rise of Nazism and fascism.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
In Europe. That frightens me because at my age in those days,
You remember.
I remember. And then, of course, I was in World War II and saw what could happen in all kinds of levels, socially, economically, politically, and even in terms of extermination. And that maybe is carrying it too far in my memory, but
well, you go back to, you remember the 30s, and I think Father Coughlin, you know, who was a pro-German Nazi priest, they had massive rallies. I mean, I saw pictures recently at Madison Square Garden or something, you know, 30,000 people at a pro-German Nazi rally. We knew that there was, you know, a deep-seated, rooted racism in this country. But
Sure,
it has come to the fore.
Lindbergh at the same time,
Yeah.
right up until the Stalin-Hitler pact, Lindbergh was pro-Nazi.
yeah. That's right.
And he was as powerful a cultural influence as was Coghlan. He didn't. Father Coghlan.
Don, tell us who Lindbergh was. Yeah. Tell us who Lindbergh was.
Charles Lindbergh, I'm sorry, the first man to fly the Atlantic solo, who was a worldwide hero.
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
But I knew he was not quite for me because he made a parade down what was then Grand Boulevard,
right,
on the south side of Chicago, which is now Martin Luther King Drive. It came
fittingly
up
so.
Washington statue, and I was going to Edmund Burke School, which was mixed in terms of race. And we were sitting on the stoop waiting as he came up, I think in 1927 or so like. And he patted all the white kids on the head, and we three blacks that were sitting there didn't get it. So we knew.
Oh man, that's a good one.
So Tim, I don't want to put you entirely on the spot, but you talk in front of a lot of groups, and I know younger people are anxious to hear your words of wisdom and history as you just told us here. What would be your closing pitch to the disaffected voter, black, Latino, or white, about why this election is important to vote and who you should be voting for?
My advice to young people, and I get invited a lot to younger groups, and many of them will say, Mr. Black, it doesn't matter who is elected, it's going to be the same. And I will say to them, and as I have said on lower level, somebody's going to be your president. Whether you like both of those or not, someone is going to make decisions about your life and the lives of your friends, your relatives, and all. They're going to make decisions. Now, of those two people, which one do you prefer to make those decisions about your future and the future of your family? This stimulates them and personalizes it in a way that they can then understand that their future is involved in who is elected to this major public office. It doesn't give it the universality that I would like, but it stimulates them then to realize that their life and their future is involved.
Don, what pitch would you make at this stage to the skeptics who feel their vote doesn't make any difference?
I think we have to point out, as Oprah Winfrey did, you don't have to like Hillary, but you have to respect, even though she's made many errors, they are not nearly the kind of social regressions that Donald Trump makes. A man who has made hate statements about virtually everyone, beginning with his campaign years ago to say that the first black president was illegitimate, that he was not born in the United States. The man speaks, looks like Mussolini and speaks like Hitler. And I hope enough people remember those names from World War II and the rise of the right all over Europe. Now, Trump is just part of something that's happening around the world. And even if we defeat him now,
we're going to have to deal with these guys.
The fact that he came so close, Trumpism is going to be with us. And that's my greatest fear, even getting by him more narrowly than I ever expected in the beginning.
Let me ask you this.
Don articulates it quite well. It's not just the present that we must look at in terms of the presidency. We must definitely look at the past and make some analysis of what that would mean to the future. And that is what Trump versus Clinton represents. Clinton represents a more positive present and a future than Trump does, regardless of whether you like either one of them or not.
Let me ask, assuming that she wins, what do you think her presidency would be like? I'm a little Pollyannish on things at times. I think that's the word. And I like to think that she will be better than a lot of people thought she would be. Whether that be from Bernie having pushed her, whether that be from a more focused and dedicated movement pushing her from the bottom up. You think there's a good chance she'll be better than people have thought?
Well, the stymieing part of that, I would agree that were she free and able to enact the basic parts of her program, which are socially progressive for the most part. The other part of this is whether we are able to capture the Senate. If we need 4 seats if she wins, 5 seats if
the other guy,
if she loses, and we must have a Senate that will feel free for the first time to stop the abolish the filibuster, so that we can appoint the Supreme Court that will set a positive course. If she does not capture the Senate, she is going to be stymied the way Barack has been stymied for the past 4 to 6 years, the way Harold Washington, if we go back in history, was stymied by the old Verdoliak
here in
crew.
Chicago.
It's a two-pronged thing we need. We need that Senate. The House is now out of reach. The House was once within reach, although it was a long reach. The Senate is probably a 50-50 proposition that we will carry it. Then we have to carry the right people who will abolish the filibuster.
Well, let me ask you, both Tim Black and Don Rose here on the Live from the Heartland show, how do you think these Senate races will go? Here in our own state, Duckworth versus Kirk. Out there in North Carolina, Deborah Ross, Cortez Masto in Nevada, and our good buddy Russ Feingold up in Wisconsin. What do you think? How do you think those races will fall?
Well, I'm hoping. Of course, I'm supporting Feingold, and I'm supporting my local person from the very beginning. I think those will, Feingold and
Tammy
and Tammy will come through. Okay, I think Tammy's pretty far in front already, but we need to go beyond that, because with that Senate and the president of our candidate, Hillary is the victor, will be the appointment of at least 2 justices to the Supreme Court of the United States. Now, that's a permanent job, and I hope people don't think of Clarence Thomas as being an example of electing a black to that place. Some of us were against Clarence Thomas from the very, very beginning.
I would say all 4 at this table.
Yeah. So that being, as my old grandma said, I can't hear what you're saying because what you're doing talks so loud. And we must look at people's behavior, regardless of race or anything of that sort. But I'm frightened again, as I said, being as old as I am, I look at the past, and I think if the president, when the president, Hillary Clinton is elected, she needs to have surrounding her people as Franklin Delano Roosevelt had. Again, go back and check with your old ancestors of what was called the kitchen cabinet, and there were people who were not actually in his cabinet, but they were so persuasive about that they were able to bring and introduce new legislation that we later called the New Deal. And the New Deal salvaged, at that point of the Great Depression, the United States of America.
Well, I don't want to put a damper on this, but the House is going to be Republican, and we will, with a Republican House in this environment, I doubt that we will be able to get much past. We will have to play a blocking game and have the people who will block the negative legislation that's going to come out of that House. Now, as far as the Senate goes, Duckworth, I think, is safe. We hope Feingold is safe.
Yep.
Evan Bayh in Indiana is looking dicier. There are 7 Senate races, and we have to get 4 or 5 of them.
Right.
And you could say Hassan in New Hampshire is a good possibility. Burr, defeating Burr in North Carolina is a good possibility. There's all kinds of possibilities. We could sweep all 7 under the right circumstance, but once again, because of the deterioration of that virtually illegal observation and letters sent out by the FBI, everyone is now in jeopardy. I don't want to cry wolf.
We'll talk more about the FBI in a moment. Tom?
You're listening to Live from the Heartland on WLUW 88.7, and we thought we'd have a little musical interlude with our third guest today, Bill Berkeley.
No, this is David Bragman.
David, I'm sorry.
David Bragman is here.
David Bragman, thank you for coming by.
David is the host of the 11 o'clock show this morning. What's the name of that show?
It's going to be called
Get Out the Vote.
Get Out the Vote. There's going to be a little bit of politics at 11:30, but I've got Sarah Wilf on. This is going to be the old folkies at home.
Okay, give us a short little tune on that banjo of yours, David, and we're going to be right back with more Live from the Heartland.
Okay. I'm going to pick a tune that Tom Paxton wrote a long time ago. We didn't know said the Burgomeister about the camp on the edge of town. It was Hitler and his crew that tore the German nation down. We saw the cattle cars, it's true. Maybe they carried a Jew or two. Woke us up as they rattled through. What do you expect me to do? We didn't know it all. We didn't say a thing. Can't hold us to blame. What could we do? It was a terrible shame. We can't bear the blame. No, not us. We didn't know. We didn't know, said the congregation singing a hymn in their church of white. Press was full of lies about us. Preacher told us we were right. Some outside educators came and put something, put the blame on decent southern people's names. Set our colored people aflame. Maybe some of our boys got hot. A couple of niggers and reds got shot. You should have stayed where they belong. Preacher would have told us we'd done wrong. We didn't know it all. We didn't say a thing. Can't hold us to blame. What could we do? It was a terrible shame. We can't bear the blame. Hold on us. We didn't know. We didn't notice that the puzzled voter watching the president on TV.
Okay, okay.
Let me say one thing. I have a political theory. I see a Cubs hat sitting right across from me on the table. My theory is that the general American culture at this moment, the United States of America, the celebrity consciousness, the celebrity whatever, I think that because Hillary is from Chicago, people who would not go out and vote at all are going to vote for Hillary Clinton because of the Cubs.
Well, all right.
I will give you an even more mathematical confirmation of that.
I love it.
This is very quick. Every time there has been a 7th game in a World Series, when the American League wins, the incumbent party wins. I'm sorry, the incumbent party loses. When the National League wins, the incumbent party Democrat or Republican, wins the election. A National League team has won the World Series in a 7th game, and this goes back history for 40 or 50
You're
years.
hearing it first on Live from the
That's
Heartland.
very cool.
David, thank you for that timely redo of a really marvelous song that I didn't think we'd have to come back to in contemporary terms. I thought it was a
just
history
like
lesson.
had Hillary using that music, introducing her, and she would go around the country.
That would be good.
Somebody once said, we may not have all the votes, but we sure got the better songs.
Tom Lehrer.
Right.
So one of the things I've been wanting to ask the master political ad creator here, Don Rose, is whatever happened to Citizens United and Koch brothers' money? I mean, there's money being spent, but Trump didn't need to spend any. He got all the free TV for a year.
That money is going into what they call down ballot. It's going to save, attempt to save the Senate. It's pretty much saved the House. And it's going to try to keep the Senate from turning Democratic. And they're spending millions and millions doing it. And with apparently some success, because the odds, for example, on Feingold have gone down from a sure thing to a probable.
In Illinois, we have more money being spent on, to my eyes, lousy ads in this Madigan-Rauner battle. Rauner clearly having tons more money to support state representative races. You know, within their districts they may be known, but real no names in terms of the rest of the state.
I think there's so much confusion about those. When you look at all those names, if you'll notice, they don't put Democrat or Republican
On the ad.
most of those ads. They will say he's associated with Rauner and Trump, or she is associated with Madigan. And it looks like Madigan is up for president or something because they're running against him so hard. The best information I've got comes from a major union that is looking. The Democrats are trying, under Madigan, are trying to preserve a veto-proof majority in the House. They'll have it in the Senate, no problem about that. It would be better if they picked up 1 or 2 more seats. But right now, the best we can say is the Democrats are going to be +2 or -2. That's the parameters.
In the state of Illinois.
In the state of Illinois, which, you know, I never thought I'd find myself saying that Mike Madigan was the hero of our times, but he is the only force we have to stop Rauner, who is almost, if not an equally malignant force to Trump nationally.
Right.
You know, before we took the break, we started to touch upon the FBI. Not only Comey's press release and his letter to the Republican leadership in the Congress, I believe, not to all the members of Congress.
The Republican, now that's incorrect. They sent it to all the Republican committee chairmen and the ranking Democrats on each chairman. So it went uniform.
So we're hearing about this little rogue nest of FBI agents in New York City. Can either of you address that?
Well, there is a rogue nest. The FBI, in more recent years, has become a serious investigative force and has had, once the Cold War was over, seems to have more neutralized itself. But there is still a right-wing element left in there from the days of J. Edgar Hoover. Unfortunately, we have J. Edgar Comey coming in here now with unprecedented, illegal, quasi-legal announcements in the middle of an election, which is unheard of. And his only excuse for doing it is that the nest of really right-wing FBI'ers have been putting out even more malignant statements. They are the ones who are leaking either directly or through channels to Rudy Giuliani, who is using language like criminal investigations. There are 3 or 4 criminal investigations. The FBI itself would never even use that. Comey never called anything a criminal investigation. He did say we don't even know in this most current thing whether there's any bad emails in there. But he should never have made that statement. But he's the best excuse he has is better he says it in his quote more neutral way than let the leakers send the messages out to the Giulianis and to the Trump surrogates so that we can get these horrible headlines about Hillary.
One of the things I hope we do some postmortems on is the role of the so-called media, this curious plural noun that people forget there's no one media, even though it seems like it sometimes. The equivalency issue. We used to call it he said, she said type reporting. It used to be called objective reporting, which I always found very objectionable, because I think fair and balanced is a better way to go. So now that I've set up my bias on this, what role has the media played in the trajectory of a Trump, in the negative feelings about both candidates, but particularly Hillary, the most investigated, non-indicted, non-convicted politician in my lifetime that I can think of? Not that she's a saint or hasn't made mistakes, but to my mind, there's been this equivalency between their roles in life, how their journey through life, that just isn't true. Except the construct of journalism, the way it's practiced today, seems to allow it to just unfold. And when you throw in the role of cable heads on top of that, it seems like we have a real problem with what kind of information we actually get through these so-called media.
Well, the problem is even worse than imbalance in the media. The media is so atomized that there is no such thing as truth anymore. We used to say, the old saying used to be, you're going to have your own opinion, but you can't have your own facts. Now everyone has his or her own facts, and that is due to the rise of partisan media, and I go beyond just the cable networks, the proliferation of cable networks, of radio. We're on to everything that goes on the internet. So we can blame it all on the media, even though there are some decent, a smaller number of decent mediums. You know, the good guys, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the LA Times,
the Guardian.
The Guardian, the places you could look to for some semblance of fair and balance, recognize the danger of Trump too late. And they have turned against him and have done all kinds of investigations, but they did the stuff in the general election that they should have started doing when he first declared.
And yet I would argue that even while some of that media has turned against him apparently, just last night there was a fairly long clip, meaning it was 20 seconds rather than 8, of Trump talking. It was all full of mendacities, and it was unchallenged because Hillary didn't make the same kind of appearances yesterday, and she had about 6 seconds on the air. And it just, so there you had, once again, 5 days before the election, Trump spouting unfettered, no modifiers or anything else about what he was saying, using the criminal thing again, the crooked Hillary. Now he has every right to his own slogans, but it seems to me if you're a reporter, there's some obligation to try to stake a middle ground of some sort.
Well, some people have tried to do it, but the biggest problem is, even among those who have tried to, that his 10 minutes are filled with so many lies that it would take a half an hour to explain away all the lies. So they might pick up one inaccuracy and ride with it. And then you get the bizarre happening of the MSNBC, the so-called liberal channel, showing 20-minute speeches by Trump Because they're trying to, quote, be fair.
It makes me nuts. You know, on an optimistic note, or hope, I'm going to approach it this way. Assuming that Hillary is elected our next president, Timuel Black, Don Rose, either of you, what do you think Bernie Sanders' role will be in the post-election environment? Whether it's as an appointee, as just a senator, what do you think will happen with him?
But I think that he could be and should be given a position that he would like to have in her cabinet or close to her. But I think, again, this is where we, the public, come in. We have to be organized to make her do what we've elected her, that we want her to do. And that means demanding that she surround herself with people similar, going back a little bit of history. Again, that the President of the United States, Roosevelt, called the kitchen cabinet advisors who advised but had political bases that they could function from. That if that person representing their district did not behave, they were going to see to it that he or she would not be elected again. You see, what I look at in the Trump, why would the media be as conservative as that? Is who's in charge? We look at the background of who are the leadership of much of that media, and they are similar in many ways. Their history is similar to that of Trump. And Trump didn't become a billionaire by being not a fairly intelligent, organizing person. And his audacity, as it comes out, is protected in many ways, because why would they be going into Hillary with the FBI as deeply on a personal thing when the major issues for the American people are jobs, safety, education, and all that? That has gotten going on because attacking her has made her respond to the attacks rather than to the issues. And Trump has never dealt in a broad sense with the issues that affect all American people. All he's saying, we're going to make America great again. Well, what does great again mean? Isn't America great now?
No, it was great when we had slavery by him.
Well, by him. This is what he's inferring. That's what he's saying.
On your take?
I have a somewhat different take. I don't think a Bernie should go into the administration. Once you go into the administration, you have to become an instrument of the administration. I think he can become the most powerful, one of the most powerful senators if we win the Senate. And he should stay there so he can be an agitator and a creator of issues. Same with Elizabeth Warren. The problem is, I don't see anybody in the Hillary camp right now, although I've heard some rumors about some people she might want to put in office. I don't see anybody in the Hillary camp who can play the role of a Harry Hopkins or some of the progressives that were in the Roosevelt kitchen cabinet. You look at the possibilities for the Trump kitchen cabinet and you see some of the worst people in the country. So I think Bernie's best job, like Elizabeth Warren's, is to be situated with their own independent positions of power in the Senate where they can move the Senate and force Hillary. But again, you've got that obstacle in the House. I do worry about who Hillary might pick, because the bulk of the Hillary people are money and power people rather than political thinkers, although I've heard rumors that she might pick somebody like Paul Krugman, the Nobel Prize winner and columnist for New York Times, to be Secretary of the Treasury. Wow. That's the best rumor I've heard, but it's only a rumor.
Well, fan the flames of that rumor.
Yeah.
If he can be a good administrator, because while it's a political appointee, you got to know how to control the troops under you.
Well, as you know, the politics of the university are sometimes more
Vicious.
more powerful than the politics of the country, and he has traversed the politics of the universities very well.
So I want to return to local politics for a moment, because everything's local in politics, and there will probably be some implications coming out of this. If Hillary wins, does Rahm get an appointment in D.C.? And I mention that because it seems to me the last couple of months, getting his police reform thing passed, having a relatively easy introduction of a budget that included some tax increases, has Rahm turned a corner, or will Tony or Lori Lightfoot or
Chewy.
Or Chewy or Kurt Summers end up challenging him? How are the tea leaves? Because we come out of this national thing right back into the local battle again.
Well, I think we have to go back a little bit and look at history as it existed at the inspiration and the aspiration during the Harold Washington period. And Don can elaborate on that period, where we then realizing what condition we were in, made through the civil rights, civil liberties period and the organization that existed in that period, began to organize specifically to bring our candidate into position to make him as responsible as possible. And we created a coalition across certainly across age and ethnic lines. We brought Chewy and others from the Hispanic community, and people like Milt Cohen and people in that in that period could cross that line along their ideological feelings and their activities with a great deal of feeling of integrity, and then bring the more conservative African Americans into, because to elect a candidate like Harold Washington, we had to convince Harold Washington that we could win. And he joked about it at the beginning because he was doing a very good job in the Congress of the United States and was anxious to stay there. But Don Rose and others like him began to organize across, and even though Harold was running against in his early days a Jewish person, they had to be, the Jewish liberals had to be convinced that Harold would make for them as well, for their cause. So the organizing factor of getting groups, we went to religious groups, we went to civil rights and civil liberties groups, and all of those groups created a kind of unity for the total community that convinced people to come out and vote, and Harold won.
And the voter registration that went on then too.
So
registration.
You're suggesting an organizing movement is who will determine the next mayor, not these personalities that I mentioned earlier.
I think you're missing one personality who has probably the best chance of defeating Rahm Emanuel, and that's Tom Dart.
We hope Tom runs.
It looks like he's going to run. The people who are up, if Rahm, we don't know whether Rahm's going to run again. I doubt that Hillary is going to give him a big job. He's looking like he's going to run, which means that Kurt Summers, who was being groomed to run in Rahm's place, will probably not run against Rahm. He is too much of a Rahmite to run against him. He's now talking about running for governor. There's a white county commissioner named Bridget Gaynor with very little record to speak of, not a bad person, but
no, she's been on the show.
Who wants to run. Troy LaRiviere wants to run, and I think he can capture a substantial part of the black vote and possibly some of the Latino vote. But I think the strongest
He'd get my vote too.
I think the strongest candidate, I know him and I've been consulting with him, I think the strongest candidate is still Rahm, who I think back in 11...
You mean Dart?
I'm sorry, Dart, who I think back in 11 when Rahm first ran, might have been able to defeat Rahm back then.
Yeah, I think
he was talked out of it though.
He was talked out of it. Now he's being
Although
talked
his line
into
was he had family and he had enough.
and that was real. I know Tom, and I consult with him as well. And yeah, I think it's eminently supportable, and probably has the best chance to unify. It's no longer, because of population changes, the possibility of 90% of the black vote and 15% of the white vote, which is approximately what Harold won with. It's now putting together a three-way coalition. We've lost 200,000 African Americans quite intentionally when they did the good deed of tearing down the projects, but not building affordable housing. So 200,000 blacks have left in the last 10 years. The Latino population is rising. It is not yet enough to do it by itself. It has to be a three-way coalition, which is a different configuration. It still takes the same level of organizing, but we have to organize a different configuration to elect whomever it's going to be. It's got to be black, white, and Latino.
You touched on this, but what are the tea leaves for the gubernatorial race? We've heard some trial balloons for Chris Kennedy, for Dick Durbin, who I'd love to stay in the Senate.
I think Durbin doesn't want to do it.
Durbin has said he doesn't want to do it. I think Durbin is going to be retiring.
Is it too late for Lisa Madigan? What do you see happening on the Democratic side?
Lisa Madigan was and may still be the most popular politician in the state. If she runs, I think she has the best possibility.
Michael?
Well, do you have any take on aldermanic races? Next time, when are our next elections here in Chicago? So we can get everybody ready. Besides voting this Tuesday or earlier.
Not till 2019. We got
a
long way.
Okay.
If a week is a lifetime in presidential politics, 2 years is many lifetimes in local politics.
So let's, before we go to David for a final song.
I'd just like to say that this is where we need to get into the educational, into the schools, and begin to involve teachers, that their future is also involved. If they don't begin to get more involved in politics and helping their children to understand, which is, again, going back historically, many of the ways we've done. And during the Harold Washington, children were going home telling their mothers and fathers, time to get out and vote, because it was a popular thing to do, and that was the kind of behavior that helped to stimulate. So we need to get into the education, because that is the generation that are going to be the victims of the beneficiaries of the next mayor, the next governor, the next president of the United States. And we have to simplify it and personalize it so that the teachers can take that message in their classes without making a identification in terms of party, but issues.
Well,
so children
I think you're speaking to returning to a sense of civic discourse as opposed to shouting past each other, not to put words in your mouth. But to me, that's the biggest concern I have coming out of this election, whoever wins or loses, is the Pandora's box of hate that's been unleashed. How do we put that back in a box? How do we re-engage each other in a way that lets us start moving forward?
Well, we can give religious with the ministries in the various districts, as well as the teachers and the community people, that community leadership in organizations that we already know exist.
I have to be somewhat of a downer here. I believe that the atomization of the media, including all media, the internet and all of its permutations, make it exceedingly difficult to bring this country back together again for a long, long time.
Yeah, you heard it here. That's too bad to hear. On another note, though, we were talking about teachers. Do either of you have any comments on the Chicago Teachers Union and the recent contract they got? I mean, I like to think of this union. They very much have impressed me, and I think they're probably one of the most progressive unions in the country. Your take on the contract they just signed?
I think the contract they signed was brilliant for them. Not perfect, but the best we could get, and they once again beat Rom, although Rom now says we're all together on this. Rom is finally smart enough this time not to say the kinds of words he used before, but he can't be happy with this with this new contract, and the unhappier Rom is, the happier we all should be.
I agree with that.
Tim?
Well, I'm just saying, the Chicago Teachers Union gives an example across the nation of what an organization can do if it's unified. And of course, they too, that unions are a target going to the national level of the opposition that's personified by the Republican candidate for the presidency. But Chicago Teachers Union is much more unified and has community support, which makes Rahm Emanuel and others like him have to follow through if they're going to be reinstated in office.
Would that we had industrial unions throughout this country as good as the Chicago Teachers Union.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be nice. Well, I want to thank Timuel Black, I want to thank Don Rose, and I want to thank everyone who's made this show possible. David Bragman is here. He's going to be on at 11 o'clock. He's going to take us out with a little tune. And while he's doing that, I'm going to quote Muhammad Ali, who says, service to others is the price you pay, is the rent you pay for your time on earth. And we say, do good in the world because the world needs all the good that you do. We'll be back next week talking about the election. And we'll talk a little bit about North Dakota and what's going up there with our Native American brothers and sisters. We encourage you all to do good in the world because the world needs all the good that you do. All power to the people. Take it away, David Bragman. And thank you, Timuel Black and Don Rose. And of course our producer, Lynn Orman.
I've been teaching music for many, many years. What about if we started teaching American history backwards from now back to then? Might learn something for the kids. Here's an Irish fiddle tune that I think a lot of people are going to be thinking about this next few days. It's called Whiskey Before Breakfast.
Okay.
All right.
That's it.
Beautiful.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Hope I wasn't too
He
much
brings
of a
back a
downer.
lot of memories with that banjo.
Who walked, but we didn't know?
Tom Paxton. And my modifications of it were because I didn't remember all the words.
You could tell. All right, we're going to take a group shot of us all right out there, and then everyone is free to go.
What's your favorite Union song? What's the one
Are
that
you on, boys? Which side are you on?
There once was a Union maid, I can sing it in this key. There once was a Union maid, who never was afraid of boots and games and company things
See, if Hillary has been using much this kind of music,
Glenn Miller took that and made a popular hit out of it what the hell was it?
Tuxedo Junction.
No.
I'm just thinking of what
Yeah.
of Glenn Miller. I remember the Glenn Miller
We
story.
must be vigilant. We must be vigilant. American Patrol.
Yeah, there's another factor in American life of unifying people is using this somewhat original American music called jazz and blues and gospel and all that bring people together in a positive way. And I just enjoy knowing that, having experienced it.
That's
from
great.
childhood.